Tigo calls from 5 a.m. to 10 a.m. And Airtel Tigo money transfers are now free on new SIMs. Now you know. Airtel Tigo. Life is simple.
Welcome to The Point of View. This is your favorite current affairs show on television. On The Point of View, we pick the right topics, we get the right and qualified guests, we ask them the relevant questions, and you usually get some useful insights. This show is interactive. If you're watching on TV, please send us your thoughts and your comments on the WhatsApp number on the screen. If you're watching on any of the social media platforms, please feel free to join the conversation. So it's been over 7 months of COVID-19 in the world, and we have over 40 million cases, over 1.1 million deaths. Yet Africa appears to have been spared. Tonight we delve into the mystery behind Africa's resilience to COVID-19. We're asking whether it's simply a question of our race, as typically black people, whether it's a rapid response, or whether it's the religious beliefs. And I have 3 guests to help me delve into this. We'll be right back.
During tough times, we need a competent leader we can trust to keep us all safe.
Nana gave me free water when I needed it most to keep me clean and safe from COVID-19.
Nana gave me lower cost of internet during COVID-19 to operate my small business from home.
Nana told us to trust him to keep our children safe from COVID-19 when we sent them back to school. Nana was right.
Nana gave me free electricity in my hour of need during COVID-19.
Nana told us to trust him to keep Ghana safe from COVID-19.
Welcome back to The Point of View. So since COVID-19 broke sometime in January, it's been very dire for many parts of the world. And we have had over 40 million cases of COVID-19. 1.1 million people have died. The epicenters of the disease seem to be in the advanced countries. Very soon I'll show you a global chart of the effects of COVID-19. But tonight in studio to discuss this, I have the Deputy Minister for Health and MP for Lejokuku constituency, Bernardo Koboy. Great to have you, Honorable Deputy Minister.
Yes, Senior Daddy. I'm excited to be here.
It's good to have you again.
Yes.
They say I shouldn't talk about the 6th thing we won, so I won't talk about it.
Yes.
We also have the, I'll call him a regular on the show when in the peak of COVID-19. And Kofi Kwache is an assistant professor of the Department of Health Policy Management, New York University. Nana Kofi, great to have you again on The Point of View.
Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. Then we have Dr. John Amoesi, who is the Group Leader for Global Health and Infectious Disease Research, KCCR. Dr. Amoesi, good to have you on the show again. Good evening.
No, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Brilliant. Let me show viewers a couple of quick stories. Now, to show how serious COVID is across the world, 2 days ago, BBC's lead story, COVID, what are the lockdown rules in place across Europe? Every European country is dealing with COVID as we speak in what they call the second wave. France has a nighttime curfew in 9 cities. Now, this is going to affect 22 million people. Spain has a state of emergency in Madrid. The government has imposed a 15-day state of emergency in Madrid and surrounding cities. They are being enforced by 7,000 police. People cannot leave or enter Madrid for non-essential reasons. No social contact between different areas. Hotels and restaurants are limited to 50% capacity and a whole lot more. Netherlands, a partial 4-week lockdown from October the 14th. This is 5 days ago. All bars and restaurants, coffee shops have been closed. Sale of alcohol in shops and restaurants banned after 10 p.m. You are not allowed to drink alcohol in public. All shops apart from supermarkets must close by 8 p.m. across the country. These measures will stay in place for at least 4 weeks. Germany, new rules of arrival for high-risk countries. We are told that a ban on large gatherings in Germany, such as public festivals, sporting events with spectators and concerts, has been extended to the end of the year in areas with high infection rates. Testing at airports has been compulsory for people traveling or arriving from high-risk countries. From September 13, travelers have had to self-isolate for 14 days. Italy, face mask compulsory for outdoors. There's a photo of an Italian politician in front of a painting. Italy has made it mandatory to wear face masks in outdoor spaces across the country in an attempt to contain the spread of the virus. Denmark, bars must close early. Belgium, Brussels bars closed but football fans return. Portugal, smaller gatherings. Now let me take you to another story which is more like an explainer again on the BBC to show you the seriousness of COVID globally. So there you have it. Total deaths, 1,110,000. Total confirmed cases now is 40 million. 40 million cases. The latest daily figure in terms of their 14-day trend, almost 4,000 new deaths, 323,000 new cases. In fact, in the figure I have on my system from Johns Hopkins, we have 5,461 deaths. Now let's show you the map. This is a very important one. This is for cases. This is for cases. The bigger the circumference of the circle, the more serious it is. The average circumference in the US is about 8 million in terms of cases. Look at the African situation. So US, 8 million cases. Move it to Brazil. Brazil is down there. There you have it, 5.2 million cases. Move it to India. Look at India, 7.5 million cases. If you go all over Europe, look at the big bubbles. Huge bubbles in Europe. Russia, 1.4 million cases. France, 897,000 cases. Now come down to South Africa. South Africa is the most serious case in Africa. What do we have? 703,000 cases. But then the death rates in Africa have been mercifully low. Now let me take you further down to compare across continents. So this is COVID-19 compared across continents. Come down further. Asia. Look at the Asia chart. No, keep going down. Look at the Asia chart. Keep going down, keep going. Asia. Yes, look at the chart for Asia. They peaked recently, but they are higher than 50,000. Look at Europe. It's climbing above 100,000. Look at North America. It's going higher than 50,000 again. Middle East has been very low. Some people think the temperature hypothesis works because look at the Middle East. It's pretty flat. Look at Latin America. They'll go up in Latin America. Latin America and Caribbean. Wow. Look at the size. Serious. Look at Africa. Look at Africa. What's going on? Now, the last thing I'll show you is go further down. I want to show you how COVID has changed since 22nd January, when the first case was reported, all the way to 18th October. Keep scrolling down. This is a BBC explainer. Very useful information. Keep going down. You will see how China used to be the lead country for COVID-19. Yes, this is it. Come back. Start from the beginning. Go back to 22nd January. Just keep seeing how the histogram changes. Look at the rapidity with which some countries are rising in there. By end of February, China, South Korea, Italy, Iran. Look at India. It's coming up. There's no African country in the top 10. There's been no African country in the top 10. All the way. This is end of May. Serious COVID cases. US, Brazil, Russia, India. It's almost like BRICS are competing. Peru. What is Peru doing there? Russia, China, Mexico. South Africa rose. South Africa went as high as 6th. Okay? State as 6th started coming down. South Africa is going down. By 26 September, South Africa came to the 10th. It's disappeared from the top 10. Here you have the top 10, 19th October. Great. Now let me read a couple of quick stories for you to tell you that this is not just by observation. Let me take you to Science Magazine. Science Magazine wrote an article in August. And this article was essentially asking what is happening in Africa. It says, the pandemic appears to have spared Africa so far. Scientists are struggling to explain why. This story was written August 11. So at this point, we still had serious COVID cases in some parts of the world. Story by Linda Nordling. And he basically says, although Africa reported its millionth official COVID case that week, it seems to have weathered the pandemic relatively well so far, with fewer than one confirmed case for every 1,000 people and just about 23,000 deaths at the time. Then this is where it gets tricky. Several antibody surveys suggest far more Africans have been infected with the virus. A discrepancy that is puzzling. So an antibody test shows if you have had it or not before. Now, a discrepancy that is puzzling scientists around the continent. We do not have an answer, says immunologist Sophie Ugoya at the Kenya Medical Institute Wellcome Trust Research Program. Then they give the details. After testing more than 3,000 blood donors, Uyoga and her colleagues estimate that in a preprint last month, that 1 in 20 Kenyans aged between 15 to 64, or 1.6 million people, had antibodies to SARS-CoV-2, an indication of past infection. That would put Kenya on par with Spain in mid-May, when that country was descending from its coronavirus peak and had 27,000 official COVID-19 deaths. So same number of cases potentially. But while Spain had 27,000 deaths, Kenya's official death toll stood at 100 when the survey ended. And Kenya's hospitals are not reporting huge numbers of deaths. And the thing is, you cannot hide death. So even if there are deaths happening around COVID, death can be hidden. Let me just show you a final story from Associated Press as well, where they contrast Africa's response to the US response. It says, as US struggles, Africa's COVID-19 response is praised. And the story also goes on to talk about our Africa CDC, Mr. John Nkengasong, who I interviewed in the heat of COVID. And it basically says that while the US surpasses 200,000 COVID deaths and the world approaches 1 million, Africa's surge has been leveling off. Its 1.4 million confirmed cases are far from the horror predicted. Antibody testing is expected to show many more infections, but most cases are asymptomatic. Just over 34,000 deaths are confirmed on the continent of 1.3 billion people. Experts caution that the data collection in many African countries is incomplete. And Nkengasong warned about complacency, saying a single case can spark a new surge. But in that same story, he says it is impossible to hide deaths. So the fact that the death rates are low is still puzzling to a lot of people. So tonight, I have a politician and a scientist, a medical doctor. I have a public health expert, and I have a virologist and a scientist of global repute to help me break this conundrum. So, Deputy Minister, thank you for joining us. Yeah, President spoke last night, vacillating between optimism and caution. Yeah. That seems to be the message. What's your general comment on what the messaging is from the government first, before we delve into this Africa situation?
Well, thank you very much, my own senior daddy. You know, when you have a history of having had, at a point in time, over 6,000, 7,000 active cases, and now you find yourself having 344 active cases. Clearly, the trajectory is one that is going down, and that's a situation that is inspiring or encouraging, and it's important to mention it not as a sign of complacency, but also to motivate those people who are right at the front line, you know, health workers, at least those citizens who are taking the protocol seriously. You want them to know that their effort is yielding results. Then on the other side, Ben, it takes just one active case, having all the conditions coming together to have an R0 that is very devastating. And I always cite the case we had at the fish processing plant in Tema. I didn't know where the 500 or so cases from one day happened. But immediately I was told of that situation, the first thing I thought of was a company or an industrial setting that has temperatures like Europe, very cold. Secondly, that is enclosed to keep a particular temperature. And thirdly, that has a lot of movements. And all these things came together with the fish processing. And with that, you see what happened. So the point is that until you have 0 active cases, until there is no active case in the population, you can always get back to a level where you need a lockdown. So your attitude should be the same when you had 10,000 active cases as when you also have, let's say, 50 active cases. Because 2 can lead you to 10,000 again. And I think that is what the president tried to mention, that look, we are not like other countries that are recording cases in the thousands on a daily. The last time I checked, the whole country, we recorded about 60 cases, 16 regions. When you divide, it means you're having less than 10 cases per region. That is quite phenomenal or quite encouraging. But again, if you know how a virus moves, one, when everything comes together, and I think later we'll come to the factors that account for the spread, as well as the morbidity or level of severity of disease, or some will put it, the virulence of the virus. So you can have the same virus infecting a black man in the States, it affects a black man in Lejokuku, and yet the virulence, the level of activity of the virus in the body varies, and that's what translates into the disease states. And these are things.
So far, I've heard you talk about the temperature in the issue of the thermofactory, and you're also talking about race in a way. So it seems to suggest that you believe that where you are is more important than who you are when it comes to this virus.
So let me say that scientists are careful about our language until it is established through research at various levels by your peers. It is not like a theory which is or a law, but it's a hypothesis. It's an intelligent guess. I think for now, I believe strongly that climate has a role to play, and I've explained before that most viruses are called common cold, and common because they are ubiquitous, they are everywhere, and cold because their virulence or activity goes up when temperature falls. So it's not strange for a virus that belongs to the SARS-CoV corona family to behave like that. So it's still a hypothesis. Then the open air culture. You know, most settings in Europe are in enclosed space. So the gym, I remember when I was schooling there, when you're going to the gym, it's enclosed. We are all breathing the same air and all that. You have
there's no circulation from
even
outside.
Even if it's the circulation,
it's not.
It's moving
within
the same. Exactly.
Okay.
If you are going to the church, it's enclosed. If you are going to the supermarket is enclosed. Almost every place you move is enclosed. That is a ripe setting for viral activity because all the particles are contained. And once the concentration goes up, the chance of moving is high. I think the third one also has to do with genetics. Those things take a long time to explain. Because if you take hypertension, for example, most blacks who have hypertension will suffer a stroke, but the Caucasian likely will suffer a heart attack. It's common in the Caucasians, not in blacks. And these things
so there are racial differences in reactions to certain diseases?
Absolutely.
Proven by research?
Absolutely. No, of course. Being black is a risk factor for hypertension. If you take the US population, the black population accounts for, I think, about 11 to 13%. Yet they account for about 22% of all hypertension cases in the United States. And then lastly, let me also say that, fine, social class or economic level plays a role, especially when it comes to mortality. So when a black man gets COVID, let's say in the States, and the access to hospital care, ability to pay, and all those things are weak, the chance of the disease progressing to death is higher compared to the white person who may be, obviously not all whites are of the, but compared to the person with a higher economic class with a good insurance and all that. So that's why a black man in Africa the death rate might not be like in the black population over there. Guess what? The climate here is not the same. So these are factors.
These are you've moved. Let's just pause. Let me come to Nana Kofi quickly on the Ghana situation, because Nana, we discussed this in the heat of COVID, April, May, June. We were very concerned about testing. We had issues with some of the numbers coming in and the so-called surveillance. They call it routine surveillance with enhanced contact tracing and all of this. Having said all that, our total deaths are still below 400. Of course, that doesn't mean that 400 lives are not important. But if you look at the number of cases, which is approaching 50,000, the death rate is mercifully low. And then and this is not just a Ghana situation. Did we use wrong assumptions in our earlier models? Or am I missing something here?
Well, I think with COVID-19 in Africa, looking at the expected patterns that came out in March and April, a lot of those were basing their variables on what we had seen in China. A lot of the China studies are what informed preliminary estimates around disease virulence, around the R0, and around many other variables that went to earlier models. What is quite clear is that in Africa in general and Ghana as well, the fatality of the disease did not play out the way it played out in Europe. It didn't play out the way it played out even in certain parts of Asia. Now, I think we started touching on some of the reasons why that might be the case, but I think the broad consensus at this time really appears to be, like some of the articles you mentioned, that there are many hypotheses, many valid, good guesses about why this might be the case, but there's no certain answer as to why that's going on. That's why, I think the president yesterday and other health leaders around the continent are urging caution, because in not knowing for sure why exactly the numbers have been lower, it's important that we don't get complacent or cocky, because then we might not know which variables we're supposed to be working on to keep the situation that way. So it's a question of the initial assumption that we got out of the early data to China, and the fact that some of the factors, like the Honorable Deputy Minister just mentioned, with respect to social environment and social class, economic status, and other things like that, may have played a role here. But obviously, there's also questions about surveillance and about quality of data and all that kind of stuff. But overall, it's quite obvious that Africa has been spared. The question is really, what exactly are the factors there? The many good guesses.
But Nana, I recall you wrote an article that says Ghana's testing regime, which initially had been praised, had almost gone south, not in the same words. And you sought to say that our testing that had been hailed initially had sort of tapered off, and that was a problem. How come, even with that level of lower testing, we didn't see the effects that were predicted by some, that this could lead to more serious cases?
Well, the question of testing and the question of outcomes are two separate things. The question of outcomes, I think, what you're talking about here with the death rates. And that's what I'm saying, there's a lot of variables that we're still not certain on as to what exactly is leading the charge there. But on the testing front, yes, I think the sentiment at the time was that we had made changes to our testing regime that meant that we were narrowing the scope, focusing a lot more on symptomatic cases. And the concern was more about long COVID, the fact that there are people who need to have the COVID diagnosis in their medical history, so that as we discover more and more about what the long-term consequences are, they can fall back on that information and advise themselves accordingly. So missing those guys in the testing obviously impact their own health seeking on one level. And then also missing them in the testing means that contact tracing for people like that is also going to be limited. So those were the concerns there about what it means for diagnostics and what it means for people knowing their status, and then contact tracing. But that's a separate question from the outcomes issue, which is really what remains a bit ambiguous right now.
Dr. John Amuesi, what are your initial thoughts on this situation? First, for Ghana, the fact that active cases have dropped seriously, the death rate is still mercifully very low, and even though we have close to 50,000 cases, a lot of the people are asymptomatic. Any surprises there?
No, thanks, Ben, and greetings to the Honorable Deputy Minister and to Nana. It's good to connect with you again.
Hey, John.
No, I think the issues have been discussed extensively, and from all across the board, from politicians through to scientists, we are quite bemused. In fact, the Minister of Health of South Africa used the expression, "We are at sea," regarding what we're seeing in Africa, and particularly in Ghana. Now, what's very interesting here is not only is the picture in Africa very difficult to appreciate or explain, but even the picture within different parts of Africa is even more confusing. Now, over the past week, I can tell you that there has been a slight increase in number of infections, slight increase in number of deaths in East and Central and North Africa. On the other hand, in West Africa, the picture has been completely different. The picture in East Africa and Central Africa has largely been attributed to the opening of schools and other places of gathering and so on. But we did the same in many parts of West Africa, including Ghana, and we did not see this upsurge in number of cases. Now, it's not only number of cases, but it's also number of deaths. So there are many things that we still do not understand, and it's really hard to put our minds around. And nonetheless, we need to sort of try and understand the bits and pieces as they stand alone, and hopefully, as we continue to piece things together, we can see the whole picture. I like what Nana said, and also the Honorable Deputy Minister alluded to this, that we need to look at things very distinctly. What do we mean when we talk about death rates? What do we mean when we talk about infection rates and the risk thereof? Because I always say, especially for COVID, that the infection rate is not analogous or directly correlated, and I emphasize on the directly correlated with hospitalization rates, and also not directly correlated with death rates, which means that you can have your infection rates changing significantly on the upside, and it may not necessarily reflect in your hospitalization rates and may not reflect in your death rates. So if you are at the far end looking at the death rate only, you will miss the infection rate picture. But one may argue that who cares? If you're interested in how many people are being hospitalized, how many people are placing a burden on the healthcare system, how many people are dying, and that the impact that has on society. And if that's not happening, who cares if the virus is spreading and doing its own thing? I like to use the example of who cares if the number of skin commensals, these are natural organisms that exist on our skin, are increasing, if it doesn't change anything for our health outcomes. I'm not saying this is how COVID behaves, but I'm just giving an example of how we need to appreciate what we mean by rate of spread, hospitalization rates, and then death rates.
Fair enough.
Here in Ghana specifically, we did a number of things. We opened up for some weddings and funerals at limited numbers. We went on and began to open up our airport and then eased a few restrictions here and there. I must confess, I was quite surprised that we hardly saw a blip in the hospitalization rate and the death rates when we did all these things. And it's again hard to appreciate, but we are not also collecting data systematically, trying to look at our infection rate. So it's really difficult to measure that. And Nana alluded to this, Nana said, regarding our testing, that our testing regime has gone much, much lower. So we perhaps may not be measuring the same rates as we used to measure. For me, an evidence of this is the recent infections that we've seen among our footballers. Now, we're only seeing this because we are looking for it, we're testing them. Jordan Ayew, when he was tested and turned out positive, reassured his fans saying that, look, I'm fine, I'm totally asymptomatic. So this means that if he had not been tested, he would have been having a field day playing some more football, maybe spreading this disease. And the argument is that when we opened up our spots and our bars and all that, we didn't go around testing people to see whether that opening had made any change whatsoever. So I'm just pointing out these things to help us to appreciate the dynamics involved here. But by and large, the ultimate outcomes of death, of hospitalization, are looking good right now. And I think it's a cause to be happy.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah. Let me come to quick testing before I go to the key issue of pushing each of you to tell me the leading cause of this puzzle. I'm told our testing regime has reduced. In fact, some people say our testing compared to the peak time around May is below by 70%. I remember the president saying that if we don't test the people, we will not find the people with the virus. Our testing has reduced. So could that be part of the reason why our cases are not going up as high as they ought to be going?
Ben, I've always mention that if a country deliberately runs away from testing as a way of keeping its total case count low, it's easy to find out what is happening by going to look at the mortality rate. Because if your total count is, let's say, 5,000, you have to divide the, how do you call it, the number of deaths by the total count to get the mortality rate.
Yes.
The bigger the denominator, the lower the rate you get. So it is one of the ways of checking.
So if you don't test, your mortality rate will be higher.
Absolutely.
Because the number of deaths compared to the denominator will be bigger.
Absolutely. So with the same number of deaths, if you do a lot of testing, and Ghana has consistently maintained a mortality rate of between 0.5 to 0.6 all the time across board.
Yeah.
So it tells you that there is a level of consistency. And look, this some simple mathematics. If you have 100 active cases and you are going after, you are doing enhanced contact tracing, let's say for each case you are tracking, there are 10 contacts. That's 1,000 people to follow. You are able to harness 30%. That's 300. So out of 100 cases, you went after 300. Times 10, 30%. If you have 10 cases, it's not 300 anymore. It is now 10 times 10, which is what, 100. If you get 30% of 100, you're talking about 30. So you would have done 300 tests when you had 100 cases. You do 30 when now you have.
So you're saying that. So in this, you're saying that the cases are the leading factor.
Oh,
but some
absolutely.
people think that the testing is the leading factor.
No. You see.
So the wider your net.
In fact, when COVID started, now the US, because they are trying to screen people to know their safety before they go into events, they are doing a lot of testing. But previously, when COVID started, if you are told that there are 1,000 cases of COVID in the US, most of them are from routine surveillance. Routine meaning they came to the hospital sick, and because of the symptoms, they thought COVID, tested and found it was COVID. So out of the 100 cases in the US, it's likely that about 80% are clinically unwell, or even 90%. But when Ghana mentions that they have 100 cases, in fact, out of the 100, just about maybe 5 or 10 would have come to the hospital. The majority were followed because they've been contact to people who were sick.
So most of our people are asymptomatic.
Absolutely.
Without testing, we wouldn't have even known. They would have never been even sick.
Exactly. And remember, the people we're going after, which gave us the huge numbers of testing in the beginning, were all contacts. And I think the period where we locked our borders, closed the airport, and had to go after those travelers, I don't know what I remember, those who had slipped in before we closed. That was a huge operation which actually made us do a lot of contact tracing. So, Ben, that is one way to be assured that we really have not departed from a testing culture in a way to beat down numbers.
Fair enough.
It's because of the consistency in mortality. The second one also is the number of morbid cases you get, those who are sick. You see, when you reduce your testing, as for those who get sick, you can't hide them. And I always say, because I'm a politician, I'll say that it's not every nurse or doctor who is MPP or NDC. So once they start getting the cases,
it will go up.
It will go out. And that's why when our ICUs and hospitals started getting overwhelmed, everybody got to know. So really, you can only manage and try to.
So you're saying if COVID is going up, we can't hide it?
No, you can't. Because ultimately, at the end of the chain is morbidity or mortality. And if things go wrong from the beginning, it will show up in these two.
Fantastic.
And that is why we can be assured that, or we can have that assurance that really the picture we are seeing is the true picture. Look, as for this issue of maybe there are others who are carrying it and we don't know, everywhere in the world, whatever figures are quoted, they call it the tip of the iceberg principle in public health. If you have cases, they are cases because they were confirmed through testing. So you always draw a pyramid and assume the number you have is sitting at the top of your pyramid.
And there are so many people at the bottom.
Absolutely.
We'll take a short break. When we come back, we'll ask how risky is our strategy now that there's a second wave in different parts of the world? And also, of all the reasons why Africa is doing well, what do my panelists think is the most important? Is it the prayers? Is it the weather? Is it the food? Or what is it? This is The Point of View. Stay with us.
Morning. I just sent you Airtel Tigo money from my new number. We delivered 2 healthy kids last night. Congrats. Have you heard? Kwesi has
2 kids. Have you heard?
My son has 2 kids. Abazi. No. No. My sister almost stabbed me.
Have you heard the news about the missing chicken?
Have you heard? Get free calls and free Airtel Tigo money transfers for 6 months on new Airtel Tigo SIMs. Get a SIM today.
See, guys, the thing will do all. So give me 4 more. We could do more.
Please be what they pour me. 4 more for what?
Must answer the guy. 4 more for what?
4 more to do more for you.
4 more to steal more excavators and our money? Bisabio. Or 4 more to kill Ghanaian businesses?
No!
4 more for family and friends.
4 more for neglected projects.
4 more for Sakawa and broken promises.
Opana, and now 4 more to borrow more with nothing to show. No way.
Hello, 4 more for lawlessness, intolerance, and harassment of the media and the political opponent. I beg you.
You make a cry self. What happened to the murders of Ahmed Swali?
What about the members of the Delta Force where they attacked the court for Kumasi?
Where them also brutalized innocent citizens for hours West Wogon. Even you the one that 4 more.
4 more for more corruption scandals like the PDS, Australian visa fraud scandal, Canada fraud scandal, then PPE, don't call me contract for sale by the incompetent clearing agents. 4 more to steal more.
No!
Away! Away!
Away! Away! Away! Away!
Vote John Mahama and NDC for jobs and prosperity for all.
Welcome back to The Point of View. My guest, Dr. Okoboy, is the Deputy Minister for Health, MP for Lejokuku. We also have Dr. John Amuisi from KCCR, and I have Nana Kofi Kwachi, who is a public health expert from the New York University. We're trying to understand the issue with COVID. Now, Europe has a second wave. Don't forget, the first wave started from March, peaked around May, tapered in July, August. Now, if the climate theory is anything to go by, this second wave might be worse because in Western Northern Hemisphere countries, their main winter starts from around August, September, all the way. Fall is August, September, then through to December. And let me come to Doc again before I come to the guys on the Zoom. So here we are, we've opened our borders.
Yeah.
We are hoping to reopen school in January. A lot of countries in Europe are having a second wave.
Yeah.
If your climate theory is anything to go by, they're going to have more cases from now to Christmas than they had in March. Isn't it risky that our borders are still open then?
No, but you see, it's not surprising to even those experiencing the second wave, based on the weather patterns. People like Fauci, CDC boss, all of them predicted that it's very likely that when the weather gets cold, they might experience another wave. So this climate theory is quite significant. And let me say that for us as a country, it's absolutely important that we are doing a test that is supposed to identify the virus, to pick an active person and not just determine exposure. And so that's why I am comforted in the fact that even if we are having second waves across the world, with our international airport open, once we are doing this test which identifies the virus, really we can significantly reduce entry of the virus as much as possible. And remember, you must be asymptomatic before you get on a flight. So all the 97, the last time I checked, Ghana has picked 97 cases, positive cases from our testing at the airport. And when I was trying to look at number of tests, when you calculate, so we've done 32,839. The positives have been 97. When you do the percentage, you are looking at 0.3%. Now, normally in laboratory medicine, about 0.1 to 0.3% of all the results you get can fall in an error margin. So let's say if I give you 1,000 negative PCR tests, COVID, 1,000, out of the 1,000, about 3 of them can be false negative, meaning they should have been positive. So because of the testing here, these 0.3% are being picked in Ghana, so that you can't say that how come they all did tests and yet you're having positives. It's a rule more or less in laboratory medicine. It cannot be Absolutely, because there are human beings handling some parts of all that. So, Ben, the world is a global village. You cannot cocoon yourself, but it's absolutely...
So you don't think we'll have to close our borders anytime soon?
Once the testing, we are firm and we don't allow any compromise. Nobody tries to beat the system. Look, with an asymptomatic person who subjected himself to 2 antigen tests, as in test identifying the virus, largely you are safe.
Dr. John Amuisi, give me a quick comment on the mortality issue. He has data that is suggesting that West Africa is quite different.
Essentially shooting yourself in the foot if you don't do the right amount of testing. So for me, I am not so concerned about mortality rates, and I strongly recommend rather looking at the death per capita. Because here you are, you have an unstable denominator. Your denominator is premised on the number of tests you're doing. On the other hand, if you premise your denominator on the size of your population, and you look at death per capita, you get a better picture. But the good thing is that here in Ghana, whether you look at death per capita or a death rate, it's still looking really, really good, even compared to other parts of Africa and globally. And so I think this is really important. Another thing we need to consider is the issue of excess mortality. Now, if you look at the excess mortality, well, let me explain what excess mortality is. All this means is mortality that, or you try to look at the mortality today and juxtapose that against mortality the previous year, the previous 2 years, previous 3 years. It gives you an idea of whether there is a deviation from what is expected. And if there's an upward change or upward deviation, it could signal an alarm bell. Currently, crude estimates, all right, very crude back of the envelope calculations of our excess mortality don't show any significant changes in the deaths that have occurred in Ghana from anything whatsoever this year than it was last year and last 2 years, all right? However, in a country like South Africa, the excess mortality for the same period last year is almost 50, it's about 57,000, all right? And yet, if you look at their COVID deaths in South Africa right now, you're talking about 18,471 deaths. But when you look at excess mortality, you're talking about 57,000. We're not seeing that in Ghana. So this is what gives me the confidence to say our figures are looking good. It doesn't mean we don't need to probe. And it doesn't mean that we don't need to ramp up our testing, because we can have even more robust estimates if we continue to maintain the same level of testing that we used to have. It can allow us to build better predictive models, which will ultimately help our politicians to make decisions in time, which will save us in the future, not necessarily the health benefits, but the economic benefits.
Fantastic.
Because after all, people are in that stick anyway. But let me speak to the Europe issue on the second wave. Currently, the Kenya Minister of Health has come out clearly to say that in Kenya they are having a second wave, which has been precipitated by the opening of schools, all right? So you see the second wave happening in North America, in Europe, it's happening in some parts of Africa. It should tell you that everyone is susceptible to a second wave. What does this mean for us now that we seem to be enjoying good figures? It means that this is the time to double down with extra caution. There are two key things. One is what is happening inside and what is happening with those who are coming from the outside to the inside. And the Honorable Deputy Minister has put it very nicely. We have very tight measures. I must say it's about some of the most stringent measures that we have right now because we're doing antigen testing. And this helps you to detect active cases, all right? So arguably, the holes of our sieve are very small, and it's unlikely that many people will fall through. Of course, no system is watertight. There'll always be those who fall through the cracks. We expect this to be minimal.
Thank you.
So that being said, the focus is what about those inside? If we change, if we don't change, or if we change in the negative direction, what is going on inside, by losing our guard, we could be susceptible to a second wave.
Fair enough.
So in as much as we are focusing on tightening our borders, we focus a lot on what's going on inside.
Nana Kofi, people don't seem to be wearing the masks at all. I think the president said that in a previous address that a lot of people possess the masks, they're not wearing them or not wearing them correctly. We have seen people are behaving as if there's nothing going on. Should we be worried with the second wave that if some of the cases slip through our borders, we could have a spike in Ghana, even though a lot of people are asymptomatic. How concerned should we be about the way people are behaving in Ghana in relation to the safety protocols?
Well, with any pandemic, I mean, the two general variables that determine how things go is how much of the virus you have in circulation and then how people behave in that context. If you look at Europe, the reason why they're having the wave is not because it got colder per se. They're having it because during the summer, people were not complying with COVID protocols. You know, people were having, there was a kind of regular summer in lots of European countries. And they are now reaping, you know, the early harvest of those decisions. And that is just how pandemics work. If you don't take the necessary precautions, the obvious things are going to happen. So it's really important right now that we double down on those protocols, make sure that we are wearing the mask, because it's magical thinking to assume that people will not be complying with COVID-19 and then the virus will also be going down. Because what you're looking at there really is just really, you know, a cause and effect kind of thing. So when it comes to mask wearing, social distancing, we really need to improve our communication on that. People need to understand, especially with the mask wearing, that because of how many asymptomatic cases we have in the country, or the percentage of cases we have that are asymptomatic, you might have it and not know you have it. And we wear the mask not to protect ourselves, it's to protect other people from us if we should have it. So it's not just a personal health measure, it's a social responsibility. And we need to try and configure the messaging around that a little bit to see if we can boost compliance. Because I spoke to Dr. Sidibe over the weekend. I think you mentioned that the current estimates are about 10% for effective mask wearing. And I think if you travel outside of Accra, it's actually probably lower than that. So that is obviously a question of major concern. Now, that might precipitate more infections, but like Dr. Mwati said, that might not necessarily precipitate more deaths. And that's because it depends on who is getting infected. If it's a lot of young people because of school openings, you're not going to pick that up necessarily in mortality figures, but you will pick it up, you know, if you're doing asymptomatic testing. So we really need to be on our guard. We cannot relax right now. It's, again, a phenomenal, great, you know, fortune that mortality has been low, but we should not rest on those laurels and overinterpret that to mean that we are out of the woods.
Now, I have a question with the same preamble for all three of you. I'm going to read a quote, and then when I come back, I'll take your comment on the quote. This is from Dr. Sam Ukwonzi. Dr. Ukwonzi is the chairperson of the Hospital Management Board at Arua Regional Referral Hospital in Uganda. And he was asked to explain COVID in Africa. He says factors for lower transmission and disease severity in the continent may include, for example, 1, a youthful population, possibly an inherent immunity. 3, something possibly to do with temperature and altitude. 4, something possibly to do with better population response because we have a lot of experience from Ebola and other diseases. So it gives 4. Youthful population, inherent immunity, temperature and altitude, and then better leadership response. I'm going to give my guests the chance to choose their top 1 or 2 when we come back. This is the point of view. Don't go away.
Don't forget the balloons,
Check.
the DJ,
Check.
and the drinks.
Listen, honey, I've got this party under control, okay?
Daddy, don't forget our birthday cake with the sparkly candles. Daddy, are you there?
The party's at 4 p.m., honey. Don't be late.
With the all-new CowPay on the CowBank app and website, you don't have to worry about carrying cash. Just place your order with your favorite merchant and pay with a Visa or MasterCard, mobile money or CowBank account, or scan and pay. Visit the Play Store or App Store and download the CowBank app today. CowBank app. Forget to cash.
CowBank. Forward together.
Since 2017, a new dawn is breaking in Ghana. The NPP is building the foundations for growth and transformation. We are curbing unemployment with new and decent jobs.
Thanks to Nana, I've got a new job through NAPCO. That is why I'm voting for him as the MPP.
The promise of free SHS is now a reality.
Through education, I have a brighter future. That's why I'm voting for Nana and the NPP.
The future of our country is in the hands of a competent leader, a man you can trust.
I trust Nana.
This December, let's protect our progress. Let's give Nana 4 more to do more for you.
2020, 4 more for Nana. 2020,
yes, Nana. Nivea Men Deep Antiperspirant with the power of black carbon formula. 48-hour protection from sweat and bacteria. For a deep, clean feeling that lasts. New Nivea Men Deep Antiperspirant. Nivea Men. It starts with you. Official sponsor of Real Madrid.
This is still the point of view. We are trying to understand Africa's resilience to COVID-19. I have a preamble again I want to show. This is a quote from a Zambia, a Ugandan. It says, the lower transmission and disease severity in the continent may include youthful population, that's 1, inherent immunity, that's 2, temperature and altitude, that's 3, better population response because of Ebola, that's leadership response, that's 4. Let me add a 5th one, divine grace, God's protection. Good. Now, I'll start this round with those in the Zoom, and I'll end with Dr. Akoboy. Let me start with Nana Kofi. Nana Kofi, just give me your, how do you rank these 5 factors? Which one is the most important? And I'll just give you 2 minutes. Youthful population and all these things. If we were to rank these as the most important reasons why Africa is doing better, which would be your topmost factor?
I think my best guess would be that it has to do with the youthful population. That one seems kind of an obvious one because what we are looking at here is a virus that takes advantage of people who have pre-existing conditions, things like diabetes, cardiovascular disease. These are non-communicable diseases. And a lot of them are lifestyle diseases that get worse as people get older. Life expectancy in Africa is generally fairly short relatively to other parts of the world. So it makes sense that if we don't have a large elderly population, we would not have the same kind of mortality numbers we see in Europe. But as far as infections, that's a different story. But I think for disease severity and mortality statistics, I think increasingly we're going to be coming down to the conclusion that, perhaps not as a sole factor, but
so the most important is youthful. So if I were to press you the top 3, youthful population is one, which is the second one?
Can you give me the list again so I can run
inherent immunity, temperature and altitude, better preparation and response because of Ebola knowledge, and then the last one is my own, divine God's protection.
Well, I spoke to Dr. Bediako over the weekend, Bediako too, and he actually mentioned, we talked a bit about this immune question. So there's some logic that I can buy into because what it suggests is that there's trained immune responses because of exposure here. So that maybe the kind of like aggressive inflammatory response you're seeing in other parts of the world where people don't have that trained immunity to other infections might be playing to advantage here. That's another one I can go with.
I don't want you to explain your answer. So youthful population, inherent immunity, that's your top 2. Fair enough.
Okay.
Dr. Amoisi, what's your top 2 or 3 in the list?
Ben, I can see you're totally enjoying this. I can see the mischievous smile on your face because, it's not a fair question, but
what's wrong with that question?
I'm pressed to the wall. So I'll put it in this order. I'll go with genetics, first of all.
Genetics.
And then I'll go with population distribution next. Then I'll go to the weather and then to previous infections or, exposures. And then the last one would be the various interventions we're putting in place. Now, each of these, I just tell you from an academic viewpoint, each of these has massive holes in them. So far, from what we know from the literature, it seems to be tilting in favor of genetics because there's a particular sequence of genes which codes for ancient humans and Neanderthals, which is found largely in Caucasian populations. And it actually has been shown to increase the chance of severe disease and ICU admission about threefold. Now, this gene sequence is almost completely absent in African populations. But you must note that Africa alone accounts for over 90, if not 95% of the world's genetic variation. So I would go with genetics, even though there are holes in there. Then I'll go with my population distribution, the young population. I'll think about the Indian subcontinent. They also have a young population, but they're suffering real bad. The weather, yeah, we can't do without that. And if you look at the distribution in the Middle East and compare that to that of Africa, it's about the Middle East and Africa about the lowest, if you look at the curves, which you yourself showed. Previous infection, could be good. What we're doing, yes, the measures always do something good.
So genetics, genetics, population distribution, and then the weather in that order. Great. Dr. Okoboy.
Leadership is, of course, all the others are effects.
So as a politician, you put leadership at the top.
Yeah, and Ben,
I'm not surprised.
The 97 cases we have now that we've picked, if all those passengers had traveled to the US, they would have entered their population. And when you are dealing with a disease that can go to absurd levels with just 1 or 2 active cases, when you have an arrangement that allows you to catch every single case, I think that is very important. And remember, by the way, my senior, Dr. Mwesi, Prof, mentioned that schools were reopened in certain countries. They didn't see spikes. They were opened in certain countries. There were spikes. But remember, we didn't just open schools here. It came with huge logistical arrangement, sanitizers, face masks, guns, and all these have been established by science to help reduce the rate of infection. Now, the second one I would mention is the youthful population. I mentioned the youth because most folks, once they cross 60 years or 50 years, let me put it, the comorbidities, become ripe. I mean, I'm talking about the hypertension, the diabetes, the cardiac problems, and most of the mortality cases that we've had, they actually had a complication of the existing conditions, and that also led to that. And then maybe I'll also go with the genetics. The genetics, because like I said, I know a couple of quite a significant number of diseases that show up in different forms based on the race that is being dealt with. And that's for the grace of God. I mean, being Ghanaians and being religious, it is what will crown everything.
Well, I think for me, I'm not a scientist, so I have the luxury. I think the grace of God has been abundant, and the fact that we've been praying has also helped tremendously. So I don't discount all those factors.
But my brother from New York, it's a blank face. He has to let us know what he's thinking.
No, he's already said what he said. He said youthful population before inherent immunity. I think it's the grace of God that has brought us this far, and we hope it continues. And then all the other factors will make sense around that. So we can add that. Thank you, Dr. Bernard Okoboy, MP for Lejokuku, Deputy Minister for Health. Thank you, Dr. John Amoesi from KCCR. Thank you very much as well. I can call you Dr. Nana Kofi Kwachi of the New York University, public health expert. My name is Bernard. Thank you for watching The Point of View. Stay safe and don't do anything outside the COVID protocols. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.